The knock came at the worst possible hour, when the wind was sharp and the widow's knees ached from a life of solitude. Maris Crow thought she wanted safety, until a lonely pirate with haunted eyes and a hidden daughter asked for shelter. What begins as a business arrangement quickly becomes a dangerous game of secrets, spies, and forbidden attraction, in a port city ruled by corruption. When the past comes to collect a blood debt, Maris must decide if she is willing to trade her quiet security for a love that could burn down the world. Read the story of how a widow stole a pirate's heart. A knock came at the worst possible hour, when the wind had turned sharp, when the lantern flame kept shrinking like it wanted to hide, and when the widow's knees ached from hauling water and pretending she didn't. Maris Crow stood in the center of her rented kitchen. It was a room of bare boards and a leaking roof, holding one iron pot that could feed 6 if you were clever and lucky. Outside, Port Caldera was half silent, half snarling. Waves slapping the rot-slicked pilings, tavern laughter rising and falling like a fever, and the distant, rhythmic thump of hand drums from a courtyard where women braided hair and traded gossip like currency. The air smelled of wet rope, molasses, and smoke from a spice seller's dying brazier. Maris had learned the hard way not to open the door for anyone at night. But the knock came again, patient, not desperate, controlled. She slid her hand under the counter where she kept a small cleaver, not for bravado, but for honesty. Then, she opened the door a crack. A man stood there with rain on his coat and loneliness on his face like a second skin. He was tall, built by ropework and storms rather than vanity. His shoulders filled the narrow frame of the doorway, blocking out the gray swirl of the night. A faded scarf was knotted at his throat, and the brine in his hair told Maris he'd come straight from the docks. He didn't grin, he didn't swagger. He looked worn, as if the sea had taken everything loud from him and left only what was true. "I was told you need a sailor," he said. His voice was calm, but something inside it trembled, like a line pulled too tight. Maris narrowed her eyes, keeping the door chained. "And who told you that?" "Someone who owes you a favor," he replied. He didn't offer the name. Names were dangerous currency in Port Caldera. Maris's first instinct was to slam the door. She didn't hire strangers. She barely hired anyone. She'd built her small income cooking for dock hands and mending sails for fishermen. Work that paid in coin, dried cassava, sometimes a bar of soap. She had goals, sharp as knives. Keep a roof over her head, keep herself unowned, and keep the fragile piece she'd stitched together after losing everything. "I don't have coin for a full hand," Maris said, her voice dry. "If you're looking for a berth, try the Red Lion." "I'm not looking for a berth," the man said. "I have a ship. I have hands enough to sail her, but I need someone steady." Maris almost laughed, sharp and humorless. "Steady costs extra." A flicker crossed his mouth. Not a smile. Relief, maybe, that she hadn't trembled. He shifted slightly, the lantern light catching the hard line of his jaw, and Maris's gaze snagged on something behind him. Not a weapon, not a crew, a girl. A small figure stood a few steps back in the rain, half hidden behind the curve of a moored sloop's stern, like she'd been placed there on purpose, out of direct light. She wore a plain cloak, soaked through, and held it tight under her chin. When Maris looked at her, the girl looked down, then up again quickly, with big, searching eyes. Delicate, innocent, sensitive in the way a bird is sensitive, alert to every motion, ready to startle. The sight hit Maris in the chest with a heat she hadn't expected. It wasn't simply a child near a pirate. It was a child being kept behind him, shielded by his presence, yet still exposed to the world's cold. Maris undid the chain and stepped onto the threshold, rain misting her cheeks. "Who is she?" The man's throat bobbed as he swallowed. "My daughter. Her name is Lena." The name landed soft, like a bell in the fog. Lena's fingers tightened on her cloak. She said nothing, but her eyes clung to Maris's face as if searching for proof that Maris wouldn't be cruel. "I was told," the man said, his voice dropping an octave, "that you're the only one in this port who won't sell a child's fear for a coin." Maris didn't like flattery. She liked facts. She looked at the man, really looked at him. "What is your name?" "Captain Dorian Kestrel." The word captain should have made Maris recoil. Captains were arrogant, captains took things. But he said it like it was a burden, not a prize. "And what do you want from me, Captain Kestrel?" Dorian exhaled slowly, water dripping from the brim of his hat. "A sailor for your business," he said, nodding toward the small fishing skiff Maris kept tied behind her house. "I'll haul, I'll mend, I'll do whatever you need. In exchange, a place for Lena to be safe while I work. I can't keep her aboard my ship right now. The harbor is complicated." Maris looked past him. The ship behind Dorian wasn't the towering brigantine of a notorious raider. It was a smaller sloop, weathered but cared for, with clean lines and carefully coiled rope. That care told Maris something about Dorian. He maintained what he had because he was afraid of losing it. Inside her kitchen, the stew pot was still warm. The smell of garlic and pepper clung to the air like comfort. "Come in," Maris said, stepping back. "Both of you. But there are rules." Dorian's shoulders sagged. It was a physical release of tension, so profound it looked painful. He turned and beckoned to the girl. Lena took one hesitant step, then another, until she was under the eaves. "Rule 1, Maris said, as they stepped onto the dry floorboards. "You don't bring trouble to my door. If your crew comes sniffing around, they speak to me like they speak to a captain, or they don't speak at all." Dorian nodded, taking off his hat. "Agreed." "Rule 2, Maris said, looking at the puddle forming around the girl's small boots. "The girl eats first. Always." Lena's eyes widened. A tiny breath escaped her lips. "Agreed," Dorian whispered. That first night was a study in silence. Maris ladled stew into 3 wooden bowls. She watched them eat. Dorian ate with the efficiency of a man who didn't know when the next meal would come, but he paused every few minutes to check on Lena. He broke his bread and gave her the softer center. He pushed his water cup toward her before he took a drink. Maris sat opposite them, her cleaver back under the counter but within reach. "She needs dry clothes," Maris said eventually. "I have some blankets." "Thank you," Dorian said. He looked at Maris, his eyes gray and exhausted. "I can sleep in the skiff. I just need her to be inside." "The skiff leaks when it rains hard," Maris said bluntly. "There's a rug by the hearth. You take that. She takes the pallet in the corner." Dorian looked like he wanted to argue, to maintain some distance, but he was too tired. "You're kind, mistress." "I'm not kind," Maris corrected him, clearing the bowls. "I'm practical. A sick child is more work than a healthy one." But later, when the fire had burned down to embers and the sound of the rain drummed against the roof, Maris lay in her own bed behind the partition and listened. She heard the soft rustle of the girl turning in her sleep, and the deeper, rhythmic breathing of the man on the floor. It was a strange weight having them there, a dangerous weight. The next morning, the sun broke through the gray clouds, pale and watery. Maris woke to the smell of wood smoke. She sat up, panic flaring for a second before she remembered. She dressed quickly and walked into the kitchen. Dorian was already up. He had restarted the fire and was boiling water. The blankets were folded into a neat, military-precise stack in the corner. Lena was sitting on a stool, watching him. "I didn't want to wake you," Dorian said, keeping his voice low. "I saw the woodpile was low. I brought some in." Maris checked the wood box. It was full. "I can manage my own wood, Captain." "I know," he said. He poured the boiling water into a small teapot Maris rarely used. "But I'm paying my way, remember?" He handed a cup of tea to Lena. The girl took it with 2 hands, blowing on the steam. "The skiff," Dorian said, turning to Maris. "The rudder pin is loose." "I checked it at first light," If you take that out past the breakwater, you'll lose steering. Maris blinked. She had known the steering felt mushy, but she hadn't pinpointed the cause. I was going to look at it today. I can fix it, Dorian said. I have tools on the sloop, if you trust me to go and come back. It was the first test. If he went to his ship, he could leave. He could take the girl and vanish, or he could come back with men. Maris looked at Lena. The girl was watching her father with a look of absolute adoration. Go, Maris said, but leave the girl. Dorian hesitated, then nodded. Lena, you stay with Mistress Crow. Be helpful. Yes, Papa, Lena whispered. When he was gone, the kitchen felt very large. Maris looked at Lena. Lena looked at her knees. Do you know how to peel cassava? Maris asked. Lena nodded. Good, start there. It took a month for the rhythm to settle. A month of days that started with caution and ended with exhaustion. But the change happened in the third week. On a Tuesday, when the heat was thick enough to chew, Maris had a pile of sailcloth from a merchant vessel. A tear in the jib that needed heavy stitching. It was tough work, pushing the needle through canvas thick as leather. She sat on the back step, sweating, her fingers cramping. Dorian came up from the dock, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. He'd been running nets for her all morning, bringing in a haul of snapper that was already salted and packed. He watched her struggle with the needle for a moment. You're fighting the weave, he said softly. Maris wiped her forehead with the back of her wrist. The canvas is old, it's stiff. Here. Dorian stepped up, not encroaching, just offering. He held out a hand. Maris hesitated, then handed him the needle and the palm guard, a leather strap with a metal plate that went over the hand to push the needle. Dorian sat on the crate opposite her. He didn't look at her, he looked at the sail. He fit the palm guard over his hand with a fluid familiarity. He smoothed the canvas, finding the grain of the fabric. Then, with a quick rhythmic motion, he drove the needle through. Thump, slide, pull. It was a dance. His hands, scarred and large, moved with a delicacy that made Maris stare. He didn't fight the cloth, he persuaded it. You have good hands, she said, before she could stop herself. Dorian didn't look up, but the rhythm of his stitching slowed for a beat. They've done bad things, he said, but they know canvas. Why does a captain mend his own sails? Maris asked. Don't you have a sailmaker? A captain who can't mend his own ship is a passenger, Dorian murmured. He finished the line and bit the thread, tying it off with a knot that would outlast the fabric itself. He handed the sail back to her. Their fingers brushed. His skin was rough, calloused like stone, but warm. Thank you, Maris said. Lena needs new shoes, he said, changing the subject abruptly, standing up. The soles are gone. I know, Maris said. I saw her putting cardboard in them. I'll take the fish money, Dorian said. I'll go to the cobbler. No, Maris said. She stood up, dusting off her skirt. We'll all go. She can't walk around this port with a pirate shadow forever. She needs to see the sun. The second month brought the rain again, and with it a revelation. Maris was in the kitchen, trying to balance her ledger. She wasn't a scholar, but she could read and write enough to keep the fishmongers from cheating her. She was muttering over a column of numbers that didn't add up. Lena was at the table, shelling peas. She had filled out in the last few weeks, her cheeks less hollow, her eyes less prone to darting at shadows. You missed the carry, Lena said softly. Maris stopped. She looked at the girl. What? Lena pointed a slender finger at the ledger from across the table. The 7. You carried it to the wrong column. It should be 12, not 2. Maris looked down. The girl was right. You can read numbers? Maris asked. Lena blushed and looked down at the peas. And words. Papa taught me. Dorian? Maris looked toward the door, where Dorian was outside chopping wood. He has a Bible, Lena whispered, and some old charts. He taught me the letters. He says words are the only map no one can steal from you. Maris felt a strange ache in her throat. She pushed the ledger across the table. Can you write? Lena nodded. She picked up the quill, her hand small but steady, and wrote peas in the margin. The script was elegant, archaic, clearly learned from old texts. "Well," Maris said, her voice husky, "that's useful. I hate doing the sums." Lena smiled then, a real smile, one that reached her eyes. "I can help?" "Yes," Maris said. "You can help." By the third month, they were a unit, though none of them dared say the word family. They went to the market on Sundays. Maris walked in front, basket on her arm. Lena walked in the middle, holding Maris's skirt. Dorian walked behind, carrying the heavy sacks. The market was a riot of color and noise. Fishmongers shouted prices, fruit sellers displayed pyramids of mangoes and papayas, and children ran through the stalls. People watched them. Maris felt the eyes, the whispers, the widow and the stray dog. Who is the child? A large man, a boatswain from a merchant brig, stumbled out of a tavern, drunk and swaying. He collided with Maris, knocking her basket askew. "Watch it, woman!" he snarled, raising a hand. Before Maris could speak, a shadow fell over the man. Dorian didn't shove him. He didn't draw a knife. He simply stepped in between, his chest acting as a wall. He stared at the boatswain with eyes that were flat and dead as a winter sea. "Walk away," Dorian said, softly. The boatswain blinked, looked at Dorian's scars, looked at the way Dorian stood, balanced, ready to kill without joy. The drunk man sobered up instantly. He muttered an apology and scrambled into the crowd. Dorian turned back to Maris. He didn't ask if she was okay. He just adjusted her basket. "Tomatoes are bruised," he noted. "We'll make sauce," Maris said, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked at him. "You didn't hit him." "I promised you," Dorian said. "No trouble." "That was restraint," Maris said. "That was fear," Dorian corrected quietly. "If I hit him, the guards come. If the guards come, they ask names. If they ask names—" He looked at Lena. Maris understood then. His pacifism wasn't weakness. It was the most aggressive form of protection he had. But the peace couldn't last. It never did in Port Caldera. In the 4th month, the trouble arrived wearing a velvet coat and a smile that looked like it had been practiced in a mirror. Comptroller Armand Vell. He came to the kitchen door on a bright afternoon. He was a man of soft hands and hard ledgers, responsible for port taxes and licensing. "Mistress Crow," Vell said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. He ran a finger along the clean counter. "The aroma is delightful, as always." Maris was chopping onions. She didn't stop. "What do you want, Comptroller?" "Just a routine inspection," Vell said. His eyes drifted around the room. They landed on the extra stool, the third bowl drying on the rack. "Business seems robust. You've expanded your workforce?" "I have a helper," Maris said tightly, "for the heavy lifting." "A helper," Vell mused. "Does this helper have a port license, a guild stamp?" "He's a day laborer," Maris lied. Vell smiled. He walked to the window and looked out at the skiff. Dorian was there, sanding the gunwale. Vell watched him for a long time. "He moves like a man who knows the sea," Vell said. "Not a dock rat. A man like that, he usually has a history. Histories are taxable, Mistress Crow, or at least reportable." "He hauls nets," Maris said, chopping the onion so hard the board shook. "That's all." Vell turned back to her. He leaned in close, smelling of rosewater and rot. "I'll be watching, Maris. I like my port tidy. Stray elements, they tend to get swept up." He left. Maris put down the knife. Her hands were shaking. That night, she told Dorian. He went very still. "Well," he said, "I know the name. He takes bribes from the smugglers to look the other way and squeezes the honest ones to make up the difference." "He knows you're not just a laborer," Maris said. "I'll be careful," Dorian said. "Careful isn't enough," Maris snapped. "We need to be invisible." But they weren't invisible. Not anymore. Month 6 brought the storms. The air turned heavy, charged with electricity. The sea grew gray and restless. One night, the thunder cracked so loud it shook the floorboards. A scream tore through the kitchen. Maris was out of bed before she was awake. She found Lena curled in a ball on her pallet, sobbing, her hands over her ears. Lena. Maris dropped to her knees. It's just thunder. It's just the sky. Lena was thrashing, lost in a memory. The guns, Papa, the guns! Dorian was there an instant later. He didn't hesitate. He scooped the girl up into his arms, rocking her, murmuring into her hair in a language Maris didn't recognize, something rhythmic and old. Shh, little bird, the guns are gone. The smoke is gone. I have you. Maris sat back on her heels, watching them. The lightning flashed, illuminating Dorian's face. He looked agonized. He looked like a man whose heart was being ripped out through his chest. Lena buried her face in his neck. Don't let them take me. Never, Dorian swore. I will burn the world first. He looked up and met Maris's eyes over the girl's head. In that moment, the barrier between employer and employee, between widow and pirate, dissolved. They were just two adults trying to keep a small light from going out in a dark world. Maris reached out and placed her hand on Lena's back, rubbing slow circles. We're here, Lena. The door is locked. The fire is warm. You're safe. Lena's sobbing slowed. She hiccuped, leaning into Maris's touch as much as Dorian's hold. They sat like that for an hour, a tangle of limbs and fear and comfort on the kitchen floor. When Lena finally fell asleep, Dorian didn't move to put her down. Her mother, Dorian whispered, looking at the fire. She died when the Navy shelled our settlement. Lena heard it all. Maris felt a cold chill. I fought. You thought I stole her? Dorian looked at her, a sad smile on his lips. No, I saved her, but I couldn't save her mother. Maris reached out and for the first time took Dorian's hand. His fingers were rough, trembling slightly. She squeezed them. She is safe here, Dorian. I know, he said. And the way he looked at Maris then, with raw, unguarded gratitude, terrified her more than the thunder, because she realized she didn't want him to leave. By the 8th month, the widow's kitchen was no longer just a kitchen. It was a home. The shelves were stocked. The skiff had a new coat of paint. Lena was writing out the weekly orders in her beautiful script. Dorian walked with his head a little higher. He had stopped flinching when people looked at him. Maris was humming as she kneaded dough. The hurricane season was peaking, but the shutters were tight. They were ready. Then the boy came. A street urchin, barefoot and dirty, holding a sealed paper. For the mistress, he said, and vanished. Maris wiped her floury hands on her apron and broke the seal. It was pressed with red wax, the mark of the comptroller. She read it. Her blood turned to ice. Dorian came in from the rain, shaking off his coat. The wind is turning. We should double the lines on the... He stopped. He saw her face. Maris? She held out the paper. Her hand wasn't shaking. It was steady with the terrible calm of a woman who sees the cliff edge. It's an invitation, she said. To what? A civil dinner, she read. Hosted by Comptroller Armand Vell. He requests the pleasure of Mistress Crow's company, and that of her associate, Captain Kestrel. Dorian went pale. He used the rank. Yes, Maris said. He knows. If I go there, Dorian said, I don't walk out. And if you don't go, Maris said, looking at Lena, who was happily practicing her letters at the table, oblivious, he sends the guards here, to this house, to her. Dorian looked at his daughter. Then he looked at Maris. The softness of the last few months hardened into steel. Then we go, he said, but we don't go as victims. Maris reached under the counter and touched the handle of her cleaver. No, she said, we go as partners. The clothes were the first lie they had to agree on. Maris dug them out of a cedar chest she hadn't opened in 3 years, her late husband's Sunday best. A dark blue coat with silver buttons, a white shirt that smelled faintly of lavender and old grief, and a cravat of stiff silk. She laid them on the bed behind the partition. They might be tight in the shoulders, she said through the curtain. He was a broad man, but you carry the world differently. I'll make them fit, Dorian's voice came back, muffled by the rustle of fabric. Maris stood in the kitchen, smoothing the front of her own dress. It was gray, always gray or brown, but she had pinned a sprig of dried rosemary to the bodice, a small rebellion of scent. Lena sat on the stool, swinging her legs, watching with wide, anxious eyes. "You look like a queen," Lena whispered. "I look like a cook in a borrowed dress," Maris corrected, though she checked her reflection in the polished bottom of the copper pan. Then the curtain swept back, and Maris forgot to breathe. Dorian stepped out. The coat was indeed tight, straining slightly across the deltoids, but it transformed him. Gone was the hunched, weary laborer who mended nets. In his place stood a man of dangerous verticality. He had shaved the rough stubble, revealing a jawline sharp enough to cut glass and a scar that ran from his ear to his collarbone, now starkly visible. He didn't look like a husband. He looked like a weapon sheathed in velvet. He adjusted the cuffs, looking uncomfortable. "I feel like a fraud." "You look," Maris said, her voice betraying a tremor she hoped he didn't hear, "like a man who commands a ship." Dorian met her eyes. The air between them grew thin, charged with the static of things unsaid. "Tonight," he said, "I am not a captain. I am your associate. I follow your lead." "Don't follow too close," Maris said, grabbing her shawl. "Vel watches the spaces between people." She knelt before Lena. "The door stays bolted. You open for no one but us. If you hear heavy boots that aren't ours, you go out the back window and run to Mother Agatha at the bakery. You remember the way?" Lena nodded, her face pale. "I remember. Be safe, Papa. Be safe, Maris." The walk to Comptroller Vel's mansion was a trudge through the mud of the upper district, where the cobblestones were scrubbed and the lanterns were glass, not horn. They walked arm in arm, a necessity for the performance, but the heat of Dorian's arm through his coat burned against Maris's side. "He wants something specific," Dorian murmured, as the iron gates loomed. "Vel doesn't feed people for charity." "He wants leverage," Maris replied. "He thinks I'm a soft target. He thinks you're a loose cannon." "Am I?" "You're fixing my roof and peeling my potatoes," Maris said. "You're about as loose as a barnacle." Dorian let out a short, dry laugh, and the sound fortified her. The dining room was a cavern of mahogany and candlelight. Armand Vel sat at the head of the table, flanked by a nervous-looking merchant named Garrick and, surprisingly, Father Tomas from the Harbor Chapel. The presence of the priest was a calculated move, Maris realized instantly. Vel was wrapping his threat in the vestments of civility. "Mistress Crow," Vel purred, rising. He wore a wig that was too white and a smile that was too wide. "And Captain Kestrel, or is it merely Mr. Kestrel these days?" "Dorian will do," Dorian said, his voice smooth, stripped of the dockside rough. He pulled out Maris's chair with practiced grace. The dinner was a battlefield of small cuts. The soup was cold, the wine was excellent. Vel steered the conversation with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. "It is remarkable," Vel said, swirling his red wine, "how a man of the sea finds himself content with kitchen work. One hears rumors of a ship named the Kestrel that used to run the blockade at Tortuga. Fast ship, violent crew." Dorian cut his roast beef with surgical precision. "The sea is full of birds, Comptroller. Names repeat." "Indeed," Vel smiled, his eyes hard beads. "But faces are harder to duplicate. I have a friend in the Royal Navy who collects sketches of wanted men. A hobby." Maris set her spoon down. The clink was loud in the silence. "Father Thomas," Maris said, turning to the priest, ignoring Vel entirely, "I was hoping to speak to you about the tithe for the St. Elmo's feast. My kitchen has done well this season. I intended to donate 3 sacks of flour." The priest blinked, startled to be addressed. "Oh, bless you, daughter. That is generous." "Generosity is a virtue," Vel interrupted, leaning forward. "But compliance with the law is a duty. Mistress Crow, I have prepared a proposal, a license for your establishment. It grants you immunity from random inspections. In exchange, I merely require a log of all vessels that dock at your private pier, and the names of those who sail them. It was the trap. Betray Dorian's network, and perhaps others, or lose her business. Dorian's hand tightened on his knife, his knuckles whitening. Maris laughed. It was a light, airy sound that confused the men. A log, comptroller. I can barely keep track of my onions. And as for my pier, it's a rotting pile of wood that hosts seagulls and the occasional fisherman repairing a leak. Surely the comptroller's office has more important concerns than a widow's skiff. I am concerned with everything that enters my port, Vel snapped, his veneer cracking, especially when it involves men who should be hanging in chains. Then arrest him, Maris said softly. The room froze. Dorian turned his head slowly to look at her. Vel's mouth opened. If he is a criminal, Maris continued, her voice steady. Arrest him now, in front of Father Tomas. Let the church witness that you invited a pirate to dinner, fed him your best beef, and poured him your wine before shackling him. I wonder how the governor would view such hospitality. Vel's face turned a mottled shade of plum. He couldn't arrest Dorian without admitting he'd been treating with him. It would look like corruption or incompetence. You are a sharp woman, Maris, Vel whispered. Sharp things get broken. And dull things get ignored, she countered. She stood up. The beef was exquisite, Armand. But we must return. The dough rises early. She took Dorian's arm. Come, Mr. Kestrel. They walked out with their backs straight, feeling Vel's glare like a knife between their shoulder blades. They didn't speak until they were 3 streets away, enveloped in the protective gloom of the warehouse district. The adrenaline that had sustained Maris suddenly evaporated, leaving her knees like water. She stumbled. Dorian caught her. He swung her around, pulling her into the alcove of a closed spice shop, out of the wind. His hands gripped her upper arms, hard. You took a risk, he rasped, provoking him like that. I took a position, Maris breathed, looking up at him. The moonlight caught the silver buttons of her husband's coat, but the chest beneath them, heaving with breath, was Dorian's. He was going to squeeze us until we suffocated. I just showed him we have teeth. You have teeth, Dorian corrected. He looked down at her, his eyes dark and searching. I was ready to cut his throat if he touched you. I know, Maris whispered. The distance between them was negligible. The smell of rain, lavender, and danger swirled in the narrow space. Dorian's gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. He leaned in just an inch. Maris rose on her toes, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She wanted him to close the gap. She wanted to know if the fire she felt was real. A dog barked nearby, sharp and aggressive. Dorian flinched back, the soldier in him overriding the man. He looked toward the street, his jaw tight. We need to get back, Lena. The moment shattered, leaving sharp shards of regret in Maris's chest. Yes, Lena. The next 3 days were a waiting game. The rain returned, relentless and gray, turning the streets of Port Caldera into rivers of mud. Maris threw herself into her work, kneading dough as if she could punch the tension out of existence. Dorian worked on the skiff, reinforcing the hull, checking the rigging. He was preparing to run, Maris realized. He was making sure that if they had to flee, the boat would hold. But the danger didn't come from the sea. It came from the gutter. Maris was sweeping the front step, pushing away the sodden leaves when she saw it. A small flash of white against the dark mud. She bent down and picked it up. It was a piece of paper folded intricately into a boat. The paper was thick, parchment, likely torn from the edge of a chart or a book. She unfolded it. Inside, drawn in charcoal, was a symbol, a circle with a line through it, and a crude drawing of a bird. Maris frowned. She had seen Lena making these, dozens of them. She had thought it was a child's game, floating them in puddles. But this one hadn't been floated. It had been placed under a stone near the street, weighted down so it wouldn't wash away. Maris turned paper over. On the back, in Lena's elegant script, was a single word: here. Cold dread pooled in Maris's stomach. She crumpled the paper in her fist and went inside. Lena was at the table, helping Dorian polish the brass fittings of the ship's lantern. They looked domestic, peaceful. The lie of it made Maris's chest ache. "Lena," Maris said. The tone of her voice made both of them look up instantly. Dorian's hand went to his belt, where he kept his knife. Maris placed the crumpled paper on the table. "What is this?" Lena went pale. She dropped the polishing rag. It's a boat. It's a message," Maris said. "Who is it for?" Lena looked at Dorian, her eyes filling with tears. "I wanted to help. You were so worried about the bad man in the big house. I thought if Uncle Silas knew where we were, he could come and help us, like he used to." Dorian froze. The color drained from his face, leaving the scars standing out in white relief. "Silas?" he whispered. "Lena, did you send messages to Silas Mott?" Lena nodded, a tear spilling over. "I put them in the drain where the water goes to the sea, and some by the road. I marked them with the bird so he would know it's us." Dorian closed his eyes. He looked like a man who had just been shot and was waiting to fall. "Who is Silas Mott?" Maris asked, though she already knew the answer wouldn't be good. "He's the quartermaster," Lena sniffled. "He gave me sweets. He told Papa where to find you." Dorian opened his eyes. They were full of a terrible, dark grief. "He's not a friend, Lena. He's the one we're running from." Lena gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "But he said—" "He lied," Dorian said gently, though his voice was dead. He looked at Maris. "Silas Mott is the quartermaster for Captain Vane, the man I owe." "The debt," Maris said. "It's not money," Dorian said, sinking onto the bench. "It's a blood debt. I swore an oath to Vane's syndicate when I was young and stupid. You don't leave the syndicate alive. When I took Lena and the sloop, I stole from them. Silas told me to come to you because he knew you were isolated. He wanted me to get comfortable, to feel safe." "Why?" Maris asked. "Because a man who feels safe has more to lose," Dorian said. "He wanted me to build a life so he could threaten to burn it down." Maris looked at the paper boat. "And now he knows exactly where we are." "If Lena has been leaving these for weeks..." Dorian stood up, pacing the small kitchen. "His scouts have found them. They know. We have to leave." Maris said, "Tonight." "The harbor is closed," Dorian said. "The storm surge is too high. The boom chain is up across the bay mouth. We're trapped until the weather breaks." "Then we fight," Maris said. "With what?" Dorian asked helplessly. "I have a knife and a sloop. Vane has a brigantine and 30 men." "We have this town," Maris said. She grabbed her shawl. "I have fed half the dockhands in Port Caldera. I have mended sails for the fishing fleet. I have listened to the market women complain about their husbands for 3 years." "Maris, no," Dorian stepped in front of her. "You can't involve them. Vane will slaughter them." "Vane works in the dark," Maris said, her eyes blazing. "Pirates hate noise. They hate complications. We make this house the loudest, brightest, most watched place in the port. We make it impossible for him to touch us without waking up the whole city." She opened the door. The wind howled, smelling of salt and imminent violence. "Stay here," she ordered. "Bolt the door. If Silas comes, you hold him off. I'm going to the market." Maris ran through the rain. She didn't go to the guards. She went to the courtyard behind the bakery, where the women gathered to smoke and braid garlic. They were there, huddled under the awning. Mother Akada, big-armed Rosa, who sold fish, and old Tia Inez, who knew everyone's secrets. They looked up as Maris burst in, soaked and panting. "I need a favor," Maris gasped. "A big one." Mother Akada wiped her hands on her apron. "The sailor?" "He's in trouble," Maris said. "And the girl?" "He has kind eyes," Rosa said, spitting to the side. "And he fixed my brother's net for free." "Bad men are coming," Maris said. "Tonight. I need eyes. I need people in the street. I need noise. Tia Inez cackled. We're good at noise. By nightfall, the street outside Maris's house had changed. It wasn't empty. A cart had broken down right in front of her door, and 3 burly porters were loudly arguing about how to fix it, drinking rum and lighting torches. 2 women were sitting on the stoop opposite, plucking chickens and singing loud folk songs. A group of fishermen were repairing a net in the alleyway, their knives glinting in the lantern light. Maris returned to the kitchen. She locked the door. Dorian was watching through the shutters, disbelief on his face. There are 20 people out there. The Whisper Network, Maris said, wringing out her shawl. If anyone tries to approach this house tonight, they'll have to walk through a neighborhood block party. Dorian looked at her. You started a riot for me. I started a neighborhood watch, she corrected. But the victory was fragile. Late that night, a sound cut through the singing outside, a rhythmic thudding on the roof. Dorian looked up. That's not rain. He moved to the fireplace and grabbed a heavy iron poker. He signaled Maris to take Lena under the table. The chimney. Something fell down the chimney, landing in the hearth with a puff of ash. It wasn't a man. It was a brick, wrapped in oilcloth. Dorian pulled it out of the fire with the tongs. He unwrapped it. Inside was one of Lena's paper boats, and a single black musket ball. Dorian's face went gray. What does it mean? Maris whispered. It means the blockade is broken, Dorian said. Silas is already inside the city, and he isn't asking for payment anymore. He looked at the black ball. He's calling the debt due. Lena began to cry, a high, thin sound. I'm sorry, Papa, I'm sorry. Dorian dropped the musket ball. It rolled across the floorboards, stopping at Maris's feet. Pack the food, Dorian said, his voice void of all emotion except a terrible resolve. The storm is breaking. We leave at high tide. Boom chain or not, we're ramming the exit. Maris looked at the man she had come to love and the girl who had become her heart. She picked up the cleaver. I'll get the flour, she said. The kitchen looked different in the dark. It was no longer a sanctuary. It was a shell they were shedding. Maris moved with frantic efficiency, shoving dried beef, hardtack, and a small sack of coffee into a canvas bag. She paused for a fraction of a second at the shelf where her ceramic bowls sat, blue glazed, the first thing she'd bought with her own money after her husband died. She touched the rim of one, cold and smooth, then pulled her hand back. They stayed. Only what keeps us alive, Dorian said from the doorway. He had strapped his cutlass to his hip, a heavy, curved weight that changed his center of gravity. He looked less like the man who mended sails and more like the storm outside. Lena was by the door, clutching her cloak. She had stopped crying, but her silence was worse. She looked like a ghost haunting her own life. I'm ready, Maris said. She tied the bag. She looked at the heavy iron key to the front door, resting on the table. Leave it, Dorian said softly. We aren't coming back. Maris swallowed the lump in her throat. She didn't pick it up. She blew out the lantern, plunging the room into shadow. They moved out the back way, slipping through the window into the alley. The rain was torrential now, a wall of water that drowned out footsteps. The Whisper Network was still active. Maris could hear the drunken singing of the porters out front, a chaotic shield of noise, but the back alleys were quiet. Too quiet. They hugged the walls, moving toward the private dock where the skiff was tied. The plan was to take the skiff to the Kestrel, moored further out in the deeper channel. Stay low, Dorian hissed. He held Lena's hand so tight his knuckles were white. Maris followed close behind, her hand gripping the hilt of the cleaver she'd tucked into her belt. It felt ridiculous against a cutlass, but it was steel, and it was hers. They reached the edge of the water. The harbor was a black void, the lights of the ships bobbing like drowning stars. The wind tore at their clothes. There, Dorian pointed. The skiff was thrashing against the pilings. They scrambled down the slippery wooden ladder. Dorian jumped into the skiff first, steadying it. He lifted Lena down. Then he reached for Maris. As her boots hit the wood of the boat, a voice spoke from the darkness of the pier above them. Going for a midnight sail, Captain? In this weather? Dorian froze. Maris looked up. A lantern flared to life on the dock, held by a man with a face like a dried apple and eyes that gleamed with malicious amusement. He wore a long oilskin coat and leaned on a cane that looked suspiciously like a club. Silas Mott. Behind him, 3 other shapes emerged from the rain. Men with boarding axes. Silas, Dorian said. His voice was calm, but Maris felt the vibration of tension in the boat. "You're hard to find, Dorian," Silas said, his voice scratching over the sound of the wind. "We thought you'd gone to the Tortugas." Imagine my surprise when a little paper boat floats right to my boots in the gutter. "Here," it said. "Very helpful." Lena made a small, strangled sound. Dorian stepped in front of her, shielding her with his body. "The girl didn't know," Dorian said. "This is between us, Silas. Let them go. I'll come with you." Silas laughed, a wet, hacking sound. "Oh, the noble Captain Kestrel, always the martyr. But you see, the debt isn't just yours anymore. You stole a ship. You stole a future. And you made us look like fools." He peered down at Maris. "And you, the widow, you've made quite a mess of my ambush with your little street party. Very clever. But noise doesn't stop steel." Silas gestured with his cane. "Burn the skiff. Take the girl. Kill the adults." The men jumped. "Cast off!" Dorian roared. He shoved Maris toward the stern and drew his cutlass in one fluid motion. The first man landed in the skiff, the boat rocking violently. Dorian met him with a parry that sparked in the dark, then a brutal pommel strike to the face. The man went overboard with a splash. Maris scrambled for the mooring rope. It was wet and pulled tight as iron. She clawed at the knot. "Cut it!" Dorian shouted, engaging the second man. The skiff pitched wildly. Lena screamed. Maris drew her cleaver. She hacked at the thick hemp rope. Thwack! Thwack! It frayed, strands snapping. The third man landed near her. He raised an axe. Maris didn't think. She didn't scream. She swung the cleaver not at the rope, but at the man's shin. He howled and crumpled. Maris turned back to the rope and brought the blade down one last time. The line snapped. The skiff lurched away from the dock, caught instantly by the outgoing tide. "Dorian!" Maris screamed. Dorian kicked the second attacker into the water and spun around. Silas was standing on the edge of the dock, raising a pistol. Crack! The shot was swallowed by the thunder, but wood splintered inches from Maris's head. "Get down!" Dorian threw himself over Lena and Maris as the skiff spun into the darkness. They drifted rapidly, the current pulling them away from the fight, away from the lantern light, into the churning gray of the harbor. "Is everyone hit?" Dorian gasped, scrambling up. "No," Maris said, her breath coming in jagged gasps. She looked at her cleaver. It was dark with blood. She wiped it on her skirt, her hands shaking so hard she almost dropped it. "We have to get to the Kestrel," Dorian said. "They'll be on their boat in minutes. They're faster." He grabbed the oars. He rowed with a desperation Maris had never seen, fighting the waves that tried to smash them against the pilings. The Kestrel loomed out of the mist, a sleek shadow. It was dark. Dorian had left no lights burning. They scrambled aboard. Dorian didn't waste time with the ladder. He hauled Lena up by her arms and pulled Maris over the rail. "Take the wheel," Dorian ordered. "Do you know how to hold a course?" "I know how to steer a fishing boat." Maris yelled over the wind. "Same principle, bigger stick. Keep her nose into the wind until I get the jib up. Don't let her turn broadside or we roll." Maris ran to the wheel. It was huge, cold, and fought her immediately. The ship groaned, eager to be moving but pinned by the wind. Dorian was a blur of motion on the deck. He didn't raise the mainsail. It would be too much power in this storm. He hauled up the storm jib, a small triangle of canvas that snapped full with a sound like a gunshot. "Cut the mooring," he shouted from the bow. He took an axe to his own anchor cable. The Kestrel bucked as she was freed. Maris fought the wheel. The ship slewed to port, heeling over so far the rail dipped into the water. "Starboard! Hard to starboard!" Dorian screamed, running back to the stern. Maris threw her weight against the spokes. The ship responded, sluggishly, then bit into the water. They picked up speed, shooting toward the harbor mouth. But the harbor mouth was blocked. The boom chain, a massive iron chain strung between two stone towers to prevent ships from entering or leaving at night, was up. Maris could see the white water frothing around the towers. "Dorian, the chain!" "I see it." Dorian stood beside her. He wasn't looking at the chain. He was looking at the waves crashing over the submerged rocks near the eastern tower. "We can't ram it," he said. "We'll rip the hull open. We have to turn back." "Silas is behind us," Dorian pointed. A brigantine was turning in the harbor, its lanterns swinging. It was gaining. "We go over it," Dorian said. "That's impossible." "The tide is high. The storm surge adds 3 feet. The chain sags in the middle. If we hit the center of the gap on the crest of a swell, we might scrape over. And if we don't, then we swim," Dorian said grimly. "Lena, hold on to the binnacle. Do not let go." Maris looked at him. He was insane. He was a pirate. She loved him. "Tell me when," she said, gripping the wheel. "Steady, steady." Dorian watched the swells rolling in from the open sea. They needed a big one, a monster. "There," he whispered. A wall of black water rose up behind them, lifting the stern. "Now! Keep her straight! Don't let her waver!" The Kestrel surged forward, riding the face of the wave like a surfboard. The speed was terrifying. The stone towers rushed toward them. The chain was a black line across the water, dripping and cruel. They were going to hit it. The wave lifted them higher. The bowsprit soared over the chain. Then the hull. Screech. The sound was deafening, iron grinding against wood, a vibration that rattled Maris's teeth. The ship shuddered, slowing violently. "Come on," Dorian roared. "Come on, old girl." The wave passed under them. The ship dropped. If the chain caught the keel now, it would snap the ship's back. But the momentum carried them. With a final sickening scrape, the stern cleared the chain. They splashed down into the trough on the other side. Open water. Maris sagged against the wheel, her knees giving out. Dorian didn't celebrate. He looked back. The brigantine behind them had reached the chain, but they didn't have the wave. They turned hard at the last second to avoid collision, their sails luffing, losing all momentum. They were safe. Dorian took the wheel from Maris's trembling hands. "Go below," he said gently. "Get Lena dry." Maris stumbled down the companionway. The cabin was small, smelling of old wood and Dorian. Lena was curled on a bunk, wrapped in a blanket, staring at nothing. Maris sat beside her. She pulled the girl into her arms. They didn't speak. They just shook, together, while the ship rose and fell on the massive swells of the Caribbean night. An hour later, the motion smoothed out. They were in deep water now, running before the wind. Dorian came down. He was soaked, his coat heavy with water. He looked at them, the widow and the orphan, sitting on his bunk. He poured a small amount of rum into a tin cup and handed it to Maris. "Drink," he said. Maris took a sip. It burned, grounding her. "The hull?" she asked. "Scratched deep, but not leaking," Dorian said. "We were lucky." "Where are we going?" Lena asked, her voice small. Dorian sat on the floor, his back against the bulkhead. He looked at his hands. "I don't know," he admitted. "We can't go to Tortuga. We can't go to Nassau. Silas will have word sent to every port in the Alliance." "We're ghosts," Maris said. "We have no home, no name." "We have a ship," Dorian said. He looked up at her, his eyes fierce in the dim light of the swinging lantern. "And we have a crew." Maris looked at the man who had knocked on her door, asking for a sailor. She looked at the girl who had hidden behind him. She realized then that she hadn't just lost her home. She had traded it. "A crew," Maris repeated. She took another sip of rum and handed the cup to him. "Then you better teach me how to read a chart, Captain, because I'm not peeling potatoes for the rest of my life." Dorian smiled. It was the first real smile she had seen on him. Not guarded, not weary, just true. "Aye, aye," he whispered. The Kestrel sailed on into the dark, leaving Port Caldera behind, carrying 3 broken people who were slowly, painfully, knitting themselves into something whole. The sea was not a flat blue sheet, as it looked from the safety of a harbor window. It was a living, heaving beast that didn't care if you were innocent or guilty, only if you were buoyant. For 3 days, the Kestrel ran before the wind. Maris learned that tired on land was different from tired at sea. Land tired was an ache in the back. Sea tired was a vibration in the bones, a constant bracing against the roll of the deck. She learned quickly. Dorian didn't have time to be gentle with his lessons. He taught her to read the compass, to tie a bowline, to watch the luff of the mainsail. Lena, surprisingly, was the most resilient of them all. She moved around the pitching deck like a cat, bringing them biscuits and water, her fear replaced by a focused determination to be part of the crew. But the ocean was empty, and emptiness offers no hiding places. On the 4th morning, just as the sun turned the eastern horizon the color of a bruised peach, Dorian lowered the spyglass. His face was grim. "He's there," Dorian said, handing the glass to Maris. She looked. A small white square on the horizon, miles behind them. To an untrained eye, it was a cloud. To Maris, it was a tombstone. "The Black Dog," Dorian said. "She carries more sail than us. She'll catch us by sunset." Maris lowered the glass. "We can't fight a brigantine, Dorian. They have cannons. We have muskets and a cleaver." "We can't outrun her," Dorian admitted, his voice tight. "I can try to lose them in the squalls to the south, but Silas is a bloodhound. He knows how I think." "Then stop thinking like a captain," Maris said. She spread the chart out on the top of the binnacle, weighting the corners with her hands against the wind. "Think like a local." She pointed to a cluster of jagged ink marks about 10 miles to the west. "What is this?" Dorian looked. "Los dientes, the teeth. It's a coral maze. Razor-sharp, shallow water. Unpredictable currents. Ships don't go there. It's a graveyard." "Ships with deep keels don't go there," Maris corrected. She looked at the Kestrel, then back at the chart. "We draw 6 feet. What does the Black Dog draw?" Dorian's eyes widened. 12, maybe 14 if she's heavy with guns. "If we go in," Maris said, tracing a line through the ink teeth, "can you sail it?" "It requires tacking every 30 seconds, Dorian said, calculating. "One mistake and we tear the bottom out." "And if Silas follows us?" "He's arrogant," Dorian said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. "He thinks he's the best pilot in the Caribbean. He won't believe I'd take a route he can't follow." "Then we turn," Maris said, "into the teeth." The maneuver was madness. They cut sharply to the west, abandoning the open water for the white-capped turmoil of the reef. By noon, the roar of the breakers was louder than the wind. Los Dientes lived up to its name. Spires of sharp coral broke the surface like the jawbone of a leviathan, the water churning turquoise and white around them. Behind them, the Black Dog had closed the distance. It was a hulking predator, black-hulled and terrifying. Maris could see figures on the deck. She could see the chase guns being run out. "They're signaling," Lena called from the rail. A puff of smoke bloomed from the brigantine's bow. A second later, a splash erupted 100 yards off the Kestrel's stern. A warning shot. "Let them waste their powder," Dorian yelled over the roar of the surf. "Maris, take the helm." "I need to work the sheets." "Do exactly what I say the second I say it." Maris gripped the wheel. Her palms were sweating. "Ready? Hard a lee!" Maris spun the wheel. The Kestrel pivoted on a dime, her boom swinging across the deck with a crack. They shot through a gap in the coral, no wider than a city street. To her left, jagged rock hissed past, close enough to touch. "Steady!" Dorian roared, hauling on the jib sheet. "Now bear away. 2 points." They wove through the labyrinth. It was a dance of terror. Left, right, hold, spin. The ship shuddered, the keel humming as it sliced through water, barely deep enough to hold them. Maris looked back. The Black Dog had hesitated at the edge of the reef. But then, seeing its prey escaping, the brigantine surged forward. Silas wouldn't let them go. He was committed. "He's following," Maris shouted. "He's heavier," Dorian yelled. "He can't turn as fast. Watch that spire, hard to port." They dove deeper into the trap. The channel narrowed. The water turned a pale, sickly green, shallow. "This is it," Dorian said, tying off the line and running back to the helm. He put his hands over hers on the wheel. "The pinch. It drops to 8 feet here. He'll ground," Maris whispered. "If he doesn't turn back in the next 10 seconds, Dorian said, watching the pursuing ship, "he's dead." The black dog came on, sails billowing, a mountain of canvas and greed. They were so close now, Maris could see Silas Mott on the quarterdeck, screaming orders, his cane raised. He didn't see the color of the water change. "Brace!" Dorian shouted. The Kestrel skimmed over the sandbar, her keel kissing the bottom with a sickening thrum, but she kept moving. Behind them, the black dog hit. It wasn't a scrape, it was a collision. The brigantine stopped dead, going from 10 knots to 0 in a heartbeat. The foremast snapped like a twig, toppling forward in a tangle of rigging and screaming men. The hull groaned, a sound like a dying whale as the coral punched through the heavy timbers. The Kestrel sailed on, slipping into the deeper water of the lagoon beyond. Maris let out a breath she felt she'd been holding for days. She looked back. The black dog was listing heavily to starboard, trapped, broken, and sinking. The crew was scrambling for the boats. Silas Mott was just a small, angry figure, shaking his fist at the sea. "The debt," Dorian said softly, staring at the wreck, "is cancelled." Lena cheered. It was a bright, pure sound that cut through the salt spray. She ran to Dorian and hugged his waist. He dropped to his knees and buried his face in her shoulder. Maris watched them, her hands still gripping the wheel, feeling the pulse of the ship under her fingers. She felt light, weightless. They didn't stop until sunset. They found a small cay, nothing more than a crescent of white sand and palm trees, unnamed on any chart. Dorian dropped the anchor. The splash was the final punctuation mark on their flight. They rowed the skiff ashore. The sand was warm. The air smelled of hibiscus and salt, not gunpowder. Lena ran down the beach, chasing crabs, her laughter echoing. Dorian and Maris stood by the water's edge. He looked at her, really looked at her, in the golden light. His coat was ruined, his shirt torn, but the exhaustion was gone from his eyes. "You steer a good ship, Mistress Crow," he said. "I had a good teacher, Captain," she replied. He stepped closer. The space between them, which had been filled with secrets, then danger, then survival, was finally empty. "I have nothing to offer you," Dorian said, his voice rough. "No gold, no house, just a sloop and a name that's wanted in 3 empires. Maris reached out and touched the scar on his cheek. "I don't need a house, Dorian. I had a house. It was lonely." He turned his face into her palm. "And now?" "Now," Maris said, "I have a horizon." Dorian made a sound, half laugh, half sob, and pulled her to him. The kiss tasted of salt and victory. It wasn't tentative. It was an anchor dropping, holding fast against the tide. Maris wrapped her arms around his neck, feeling the solid, steady beat of his heart against hers. She looked over his shoulder to see Lena sitting in the sand, watching them with a smile, drawing a new picture with a stick, not a boat, but a house with 3 figures. The wind was fair, the water was clear. They were finally free.